Welcome back. Our next guest is a survivor of a mass shooting at the University of Texas that killed 14 people. At the time, mass shootings were not as common as they are today. The traumatic experience gradually led Shelton Williams to write about crime and society in America. How you been? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Tell you what, we'll walk right in this way.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I spoke with Shelton at our offices in Washington, D.C. He works just a few blocks away from here at the Center for International Studies. In August 1966, Shelton was a senior at the University of Texas.
I do remember every moment of that day. It was a big day for us already because for the first time since my wife and I had gotten married, and we were married very young, her younger sister, Tyra, had come. She was 13 at the time, and we were going to get to show her Austin. We were very proud of Austin. It was a beautiful day, bright and sunshiny, just like today. It was a Monday, and we were driving down a street called Guadalupe, which people call the Drag, and we'd come up to a corner, and Tyra said, "The thing I like about Austin is that there's always something happening here." And we drove about a quarter of a block further, and I heard the shots. And coming from West Texas, where I grew up with guns, I had guns, everybody I knew had guns, I recognized that these were shots. They weren't backfires. I knew that someone was shooting. And I looked over to my left. I was in my brand new 1966 bright red Ford Mustang. I looked over, I saw a man crouching down. I said, "Where's the shooting come from?" And he pointed over his head up toward the tower. And I said, "Somebody's up there shooting." And I backed my car 40 miles an hour back to where I came from, back to that corner where I came from. Backed the car next to a jewelry store up on the curb so that Tyra, the 13-year-old, would not be exposed to the danger. And I went out to the middle of the intersection and started stopping people and saying, "Turn back, there's somebody up there shooting." And then after a few minutes, I realized that Tyra was scared to death. And I said, "I better leave." And so we drove down the street a little bit. And the reason we were where we were at the time, I was on my way to pick up my wife for lunch because she worked on the campus of the University of Texas. And I said, "Oh my gosh, was my wife out on the street when he started shooting? Can I reach her?" And it's actually miraculous because I got into a bookstore and I called her and she was there. She had not gone out. Fortunately, she's very bad on time and often is late for things, and she hadn't left the office yet. And she stayed there, and after it was over, we saw many gunshot marks on the side of her building.
That day, Charles Whitman, a Marine veteran, had killed his wife and mother before taking rifles to the tower at the University of Texas. And then he opened fire. In 96 minutes, he shot and killed 14 people, including a baby pronounced dead upon delivery. And he injured 31 other people. This was the first mass campus murder in the U.S. What's the terror like of, you've got a sister-in-law you've got to try and protect, but you don't know the condition of your wife. You know there's an active shooter. I mean, describe the horror and what that's like.
The horror came later because I did act on instinct. I said, I've got to stop people from going there. I've got to protect her. I'm standing out in the middle of the street. By the way, 7 people were shot on that corner. He was not looking my way. But that night, I worked as a night watchman at the State Health Department, and I worked every other night from midnight till 6 a.m., and that was my night to work. So I had to go to work, and I had to leave my wife and her sister in the apartment, and I never slept. They slept, and they heard gunshots all night long. And that's when it hit me. I mean, I could have died, and I have that thought all the time. Tyra is now 69 years old. We bought her and me a lot of days and a lot of years by sheer luck. And you might not know this, or maybe you do if you've read the book. I knew the guy. It turned out after the fact, I knew Charles Whitman.
Yeah, Charlie Fingernails.
Charlie Fingernails is what I call him.
Explain why that he has a nickname for you.
Well, he has a nickname because the entire spring semester of my senior year, I went to this political history class every Tuesday and Thursday at 1:30, but I'm an early bird on everything. And I would always arrive around 1, and I sat in a windowsill, and there was another person sitting in the next windowsill over. I studied my notes. He talked, and he chewed his fingernails. And it was the most excruciating thing that I ever saw. He would make me shudder when I saw him. But then eventually I would hear him talking, and he would claim to be a marksman with the Marines. And people would ask him about, don't you wish you were in Vietnam killing gooks now? And he would tell stories, and he had kind of charisma about this. But I went home and I told my wife, you know, my cousin had been murdered when I was in high school, and now I was in college and I was encountering this guy. And of my cousin's killer, they said, oh, he's not the kind of boy who would do that sort of thing. I told my wife, if this guy ever does anything violent, they better not say he's not the kind of guy who would do violent things, because he is.
So you could see that about him. You could see that about him. So you weren't surprised. I mean, you must have been astonished that you'd come in contact with this guy.
I was astonished but not surprised.
Yeah.
Because I saw him as violent. And then, of course, you read about him. You read about things. And so one of the things I read about, and I had encountered this particular person I'm about to tell you about before in my own experience, because I had gone to him about another troublesome person in my life. And I thought, this guy is not competent to do what he's supposed to be doing. He was a psychiatrist at the University of Texas, student psychiatrist. And Charles Whitman had gone to him, and he had said to the psychiatrist, sometimes I feel like going up on the tower and shooting people with a deer rifle. That's what I would call a red flag.
Absolutely.
And there was no intervention, there was nothing, and he explained himself, the psychiatrist explained himself later. According to protocol, if you don't name who you want to kill, it's not a real threat. It's just kind of anguished musings of some sort. But I've looked at that, and we've had a lot of shooters since then, more recently in this century than last. But I think about who the people are who did it, I don't think we should lionize them, but we should understand them. They're not all nuts. They're not all politically motivated, but every one of them is in distress just prior to its happening. And many of them have expressed online or to counselors or to teachers or to friends how angry they are at the world. And so they may not be clinically insane or whatever that term means nowadays, but they are in a distressful state.
I want to go there, but let's take a step back to that day.
That
again.
day?
And put us in your skin. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? I mean, you mentioned that you were in the car, you heard gunshots going off, you recognized it because you grew up in Texas. There's a prevalence of guns there. You recognize this is gunfire.
And there was gunfire coming back up to Charles Whitman, too.
Well, talk about, well, let's go there too, but start with the gunfire coming down. What's that like? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? I'm sure it's not just gunfire. I mean, there's got to be screams. There's got to be...
You heard loud cracks. And there's the difference between the pop, pop, pop of a handgun and a crack of a rifle. So you know that difference. And you were hearing frequent cracks. And I could tell that it was not aimed at me or at my location at that time. Although a person had just been killed probably 2 minutes before I arrived at that very spot, because the person's body was to my left. And I did not hear screaming. I heard a lot of people running. I saw a lot of people running, and a lot of people just looking up, dumbfounded, because people didn't know what could this possibly be. And people did think it was a Western shootout kind of performance of some kind, rather than a real shooting. I knew it was a real shooting. But afterwards, I had to go pick up my wife. And that was quite a reunion. I was very happy to see her. And then we walked across campus, and there was blood everywhere. And people were crying, and people were still scared, because there was a rumor that there were 2 shooters, not just one, up there. So they were still worried. And then we wandered close to the base of the tower, and just as we arrived, they brought a dead body out on a gurney. And everybody said, "That's the guy." You couldn't see anything. But the truth is, we don't know if that was the guy, because he killed 2 other people on his way up. He killed a family and left one family member severely wounded, who turned out to be a student at the same school, graduate school here in Washington, D.C., that I attended. So to me, seeing the blood and seeing all of that activity was the most amazing thing. And then days afterwards, people going around and looking at the residue of the shootings and the evidence of the shootings. You could go on campus today, and I could show you, and I've done this with students, I could show you chipping and blocks that were the result of his shooting from the tower over 56 years ago.
Shelton's experiences in Texas led him to write about crime and society in the U.S. His books address those events and their dramatic consequences. His characters get caught up in social scenarios that often lead to murder.
Talk to me about writing. Is it a good outlet for you, and do you kind of take a lot of these kinds of experiences in a cathartic way, kind of work your way through them?
2 questions, really, and yes, I love it as an experience, and I've fallen into a habit of waking up very early in the morning, between 5 and 6, and writing until 9 or so. And when I get on a roll, I roll. I mean, it takes me about a year to do a book. And I usually get inspired by an event, though the first book I wrote, it took me 25 years to actually write. But then I wrote the second one, the one about Whitman, instantly. I mean, just completely. It just kept going. And then the ones on the detective series, it was just before COVID, during COVID, and up until recently. And I've enjoyed it very much. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and I've interacted with more people as a result of it. because I send it off to people to have them give me responses or check my accuracy. So it's been a social activity for me. And I've enjoyed it very much. It is cathartic.
That's fantastic. Let me ask you one other question. The impact this type of writing has on students or people that you've come in contact with, because I know you have stories of how it has changed people's lives.
Well, I have, especially the book about Betty,
Yeah.
especially Washing the Blood, but also Summer of '66. The others have, and I've been gratified by it, but those first two had a real emotional impact because people were associated with the event or knew the person or felt that justice hadn't been served in some way. And to give voice, you may not remember, but if you do, that's fine. But Betty was made out to be the bad person in the relationship, and her killer was the victim. And so I felt like I had to give voice to her, and most people think who've read it believe it.
Let me ask one final question. I have a friend of mine, Dave Cullen, who wrote the book Columbine, which was a New York Times bestseller, and he said, I don't want to be that mass shooting guy. And that's on a couple of different levels. One is that as a writer and a journalist, he just didn't want to be like the mass shooting guy where he just wrote books about mass shootings. But on another, even deeper level was he didn't want to be that guy people call an interview after a mass shooting, that he just didn't want to always talk about mass shootings, that it was a part of his life. And you have such an accomplished life. And we've had an opportunity to talk on television a couple of times, and we've talked about mass shooting. And I wonder if that Dave Cullen line resonates with you and what you think about that.
I've made jokes about it. My books have humor in them. They are about tragedies, and one of the reviewers said, I don't know how he does it, but he manages to get humor into these books because life is not just terror. But I've said every time there's a mass shooting, the BBC called me, the Washington Post called me, you called me, thank you very much. I don't want to be that guy. On the other hand, I need to be that guy.
And the need is?
Well, you need to know what it could do to you. You need to know what it's like, and you've got to think about it. You've got to empathize. If you don't have empathy, you're not human. And so you got to empathize, I say, even with the shooter. That's why I constantly mention that they're in stress. But you got to empathize with the people, not the people who died, yes, but the loved ones around them, because that's the reverberation. Your life is over, but your absence in the lives of others is the hurting point. Not to have you in their lives anymore changes the trajectory and the tenor of their lives. And so I don't say prayers like that. To me, that's dismissive. I say, really reach out to people who are in this kind of stress. Like I say, it's a societal thing. And do something. Not from a great distance. I can't do anything for the people of Buffalo or Uvalde, but if volunteer at your school, try to support organizations that support people in this kind of stress. Do the American thing. Be involved in your community and try to make it better. And so I need to be the guy sometimes to say that. Don't just go on like life is normal. Life is not normal now. It's something's wrong. Something's wrong, and we got to do something about it. And so I'm that guy.
You're that guy. Thank you for being that guy.
Thank you.